Welcome to our afternoon keynote at PyCon Sweden 2020. I'm happy to introduce to you Ákos Hochrein, who joined PyCon Sweden already the last years. So Ákos worked as a developer in both front-end and backend, and now he works as an engineering manager at Prezi, and will tell us more about what that actually means. So Ákos, the stage is yours.
One sec, I have an echo. Okay, I just had to close the stream because it was open for me. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Christine, for the fantastic introduction. As she said, my name is Ákos Hochrein. I'm an engineering manager at Prezi. I live in Germany, Berlin, not to confuse with the Berlin in the United States. And yeah, I'm here to talk to you about a little bit about my career, a little bit about what I do today, and a little bit about what probably your boss is doing. So let's get started. Just like most of you, I started off as a developer. These are my contribution graphs since 2013, I believe. I started a couple of years before that as a consultancy company, and since then, I started my career, as most of you did, coding a lot, writing tests, making sure that the product that we are building works, designing modules, designing functions, building features for people. After a while, just like any of your careers, my career also grew. I started picking up more and more responsibilities and ensuring success for the company on a business level as well. At Prezi, I wrote a bunch of these documents that we call architecture brasks. Architecture brasks were basically planning documents on how we want to solve a certain technical problem. And, this elevated my career. This helped me think more about the business. During this time, I also became a technical lead in my team, and it was a blast. I had a lot of responsibilities. I had a bunch of things to do, a bunch of technical decisions to make, and stuff like this. When you move a little bit quickly in your career, there always comes a time when you realize that, oh, actually, I want to slow down a bit and dive deeper. So after I was a technical lead, I put huge focus on Python. I wanted to become a better engineer. I wanted to become the best engineer. And it was a pretty good move, actually. I focused a lot on Python. I learned a lot about the new technologies that are coming with it. I also worked a bunch with design patterns and how they interact with the systems that they are working with. I learned a lot about microservices and how we can optimize these communications even better. During this time, I also helped a lot of other engineers to get to their best, to become their best potential. I have a huge passion for teaching, and yeah, my previous conference presentations might also show you this. But yeah, this was a hugely important thing for me, and it is up until today, to help people grow and to make them understand and reach their true potentials. And at this time, I took on various roles as architects and chapter leads. I worked for companies like HelloFresh here in Berlin and Prezi as well, to help them solve difficult technical problems in simple, elegant, and understandable way for engineers. After a while, though, I realized that even though I love tech and it's super, super fun to write code, I started realizing that I need to have a change in my career. I moved to Berlin. This was not a huge change in my career. It was a huge change in my life. But I started working here for Prezi. I started working here to build them a team. So I was completely alone in the beginning, literally sitting in the other room, waking up, getting to my desk, talking to Budapest, San Francisco, and Riga, and shipping some code. In the meantime, I was hiring. And, we managed to build a team of 6 amazing people who I helped succeed. And we had great technical and product projects that we were tackling. We helped Prezi move from the one product to the presentations into this 4-product suite, one of which is Prezi Video, which you are seeing right now live in action. And admittedly, because of the nature of the projects that I was working with, I had to move further away from Python, and I had to look more deep into TypeScript. And if you don't like TypeScript, I completely understand you, but I highly recommend giving it a look. Maybe it's going to give you a new perspective of how to write Python code. As this year has passed, I was managing this team, and I was also a heavy technical contributor. Changes happened, and eventually I inherited another team from Budapest. So now I'm working with Bio in Budapest, and I'm working with Trezor here in Berlin. I'm working with 8 amazing, clever people with whom we are delivering cool projects. And, working across countries, managing and helping these people to be more successful. The current pandemic situation eventually would have forced us to do this anyway. But, working with 2 countries is in itself a pretty big challenge. So yeah, what is the talk about then? It's about these 2 areas when I became essentially a manager. So let's talk about what the hell my boss does anyway. All right, let's get started with one of the most important things that I think an engineering manager should be focusing on, and that is the people. And how do we help them become their best selves? And now, as a starter, I would like to introduce to you a framework in which I like to work, which is called the Radical Candor framework. I didn't come up with this. This is from a fantastic book called Radical Candor by Tim Scott. And there are essentially 2 main factors which we are going to talk about. The first one is caring personally, and the second one is challenging directly. As you can see in this graph here, we are working with the 2 axes. The horizontal one being the challenging directly, and the vertical one being the caring personally. Challenging directly basically means that I want to make sure that you are working on the things that you are supposed to be working on. I want to make sure that when you do good things, then you get the appropriate praise. And when you do bad things, quote unquote bad things, then we address these things and we have a discussion around them, which could sometimes be difficult. And the caring personally axis, it basically means that, you are ultimately a person. You are ultimately a human being who has feelings, who has things to say, who has needs. And I want to make sure that you are being listened to. Let's go through these quadrants to get a little bit more understanding of what I'm talking about. And let's start with the most difficult one, which is the manipulative insincerity. There are bosses who are like this. There are bosses who don't care about you personally, and when you screw up, then they don't tell you that you did something wrong. This is a horrible place to be in. And if you feel like this is the case, I highly encourage you to talk to your boss. Or if you are a boss watching this presentation right now, then I highly recommend looking at yourself and reevaluating things. If you don't get feedback from your boss about your work, if you don't feel like that they care about you, that they ask you how your dog is doing at home, then probably you are living in this quadrant. This is leading nowhere in your career. You're not going to grow, and you're not going to even get the good feeling of going to work. Arguably, the second least efficient quadrant is ruinous empathy. I think most bosses end up in here very easily because this is the land of easy conversations. This is the land where your boss always tells you that, oh, you're doing a great job. Oh, don't worry about it. Everything is a-okay. But in reality, it's not always like this. In reality, We all make mistakes. In reality, we need to be challenged as well. I need to be challenged as well. I need to get the appropriate feedback that I require to do my job better. I don't want to stay where I am. I want to grow. I want to become a better engineer, a better engineering manager, a better data analyst. If we don't get the appropriate feedback, and if we don't have the tough conversations which require it, then we're going to end up in ruinous empathy. This is, by the way, really bad for businesses. Just imagine a business where bosses just say, oh, everything is fine to their employees. There's never going to be growth. Issues are never going to be fixed, and we're never going to address real customer issues. Let's shift into where we challenge directly really hard, but we don't care about the people at all. And this is the quadrant of obnoxious aggression. Now, this can be super efficient on the short run. Imagine people, visionaries, actually in our industry, like Steve Jobs. He was living in this quadrant, yet he was leading people who were building the iPhone. So, this can be super efficient. Your boss can be really demanding of you. On the other hand, he can be yelling at you all the time. This yields results, but it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable because if I hate going to my job, if I don't like to listen to what my boss tells me because every single time I just suck, then I'm not going to want to stay at my job for a very long time. Now let's go to the happy land, which is radical candor, where people take care of you personally and people challenge you directly. This is maximum efficiency. I care about you as a person. I want to make sure that you feel good. And I want to make sure that you live up to your full potential. So I make sure that you hear the difficult conversations that you are supposed to hear. If you think about it, even families work like this. When you talk to your parents, your partner, or your good friends, they care about you personally. You know that you are very important for them. You know that you have these great fun conversations at lunch. But when you screw up, you expect them to tell you if you did something stupid. So you can change and you can become a better person. The Radical Candor Framework is a great conversation starter. Here's a QR code if you want to check out the book for it. This is a great place to start as an engineering manager. And even if you're not an engineering manager, think about this. Where do you think you land in this framework? Where do you think your boss lands? Are we in ruinous empathy right now? Do I get enough feedback? Are we in obnoxious aggression? Or are we really happy in the radical candor part? Who knows? It could be a great conversation to have with your boss. All right, now that we understand the basics, it's time to jump into some practicalities of what I like to do. And the first one, probably all of you know this, is the one-on-ones, right? We love meeting with our boss sometimes, right? If a boss is too demanding or they don't really understand what's going on, then it can be a pain in the butt sometimes. And I will let you know now how I run one-on-ones. The first principle that I do every single time that I think is the most important is that one-on-ones are for the employee and not the employer. One-on-ones are not great if you are doing reports all the time. Oh, did you do these cards? Yes, everything is done. Oh, then please move the cards on Jira. Okay, next. These are not super efficient. These are not solving real problems in the company, and these are not solving real problems in the team. So whenever I like to do one-on-ones, they always focus on the employee, to ask them the questions, what concerns them, to pull out the information, how things could be better for them. Another thing I like to do is doing it often and adjusting if needed. Personally, as I mentioned, right now I'm working with 8 people. We have weekly one-on-ones, 1 hour. Now, this is a lot of time. It's a quarter of my week gone almost immediately. So, these one-on-ones should be efficient. They should actually yield some results. But doing it often is actually quite important. Making sure that people are heard and being taken care of is super important. On the other hand, it's possible that your boss has 20 reports or 30. That could also mean that you don't get the attention that you feel like you deserve. In this case, talk to your boss and figure something out. Maybe half an hour every 2 weeks is not so bad that much. Maybe you can do it more often. Bosses are also supposed to be flexible. We are supposed to treat each employee as an individual. If you don't need an hour every week, or if you do, then we should be able to adjust and talk about it. There are some people who I have 2 hours every now and then every week because they require my attention and require my help. And that's completely okay. And one important thing around this, it's all selfish, but there should be feedback given to the manager. Just like you folks, if you don't get feedback, you're not going to grow, right? And it's also true for the manager. If I don't get feedback from my employees on how I can improve and how I can grow, just like I'm trying to help them grow, then we're going to get stuck. Let's talk a little bit about the tools of trade. Essentially, if you take away one thing from this, make sure that you write down everything. Proper documentation of your one-on-ones is super important because then you can back reference if your boss told you something that you need to do or told you something that you don't need to do, have it written down. This can be as simple as a Google document or some shared drive where you can put information. Personally, at Prezi, we use this system called Small Improvements. The reason why it's great is because it handles the one-on-ones. Whoops, that's a cool zoom. It handles the one-on-ones. It also has this system that's called the kudos system, which essentially enables people to give other employees praise if they do good. It's frankly amazing, and everybody should be giving more praise to their peers. And last but not least, feedbacks. Systemizing feedbacks is really, really important for the company. The reason is not really the company, but for you, actually. Getting your appropriate feedback and making sure that it's written down, and it can translate to an action that you can do with your manager. If your company doesn't have any feedback structure or doesn't have a tool to do this, then I highly recommend talking to your boss. And asking him, hey, how can I grow? How can I get feedback from my peers? How can I get information of what I'm doing right and what I'm not doing that right? And then once you get this information, it's going to be much easier for both of you to actually address these questions and work on these topics. Feedbacks are going to be super important later in this talk, but getting feedback is in general very, very, very important. I highly recommend trying to get feedback every 3 to 6 months, if possible. And if you feel like it's required more often, then more often is also great. Sometimes getting feedback about the big project that you were working on can actually help you reflect better on how the project went and how you can do better the next time you are doing something. Getting feedback regularly from your peers can help them reflect on you over a time period and how you have grown. Getting feedback also helps you determine which areas you have gotten stronger and which areas you're doing just quite fine. Now, I think that that boils down from this is always the most important question. How am I going to get better? How am I going to become a better engineer? How am I going to become a better employee? How is my career going to look in the future? What an engineering manager always wants to avoid is this, right? You don't want to sit in the same position for 40 years and just be still there. It's also bad for you as an employee, right? If you want to change jobs, how do you determine where you are standing? And, different companies have different systems for this. I'm going to give you an example of how we do it at Prezi. We have this internal tool called the Engineer engineering growth framework evaluator, which is basically a matrix that goes from 1 to 6, from engineer 1 to engineer 6. Engineer 6 has this fantasy name called principal engineer, I think, and everything in between you can imagine. And we are assessing people according to 3 pillars: technical, meaning how good are you at actual software; execution, how well you work with processes; and multiplier, how good of a leader are you. This is a great way to sit down with your engineering manager and actually have a conversation of where you are standing. And after you sit down, you can click together some example like this, right? We can see that this person is not as strong in technical, but quite good at communication and leadership. And we can have these conversations like, hey, do you want to get better at the technical stuff? Is this important for you? Or would you actually solidify your knowledge at execution and maybe look for becoming a Scrum Master in the future? A framework like this demystifies a lot of things and actually helps engineers to compare themselves to the industry as well. The person who is evaluated in this framework, let's say as a senior engineer, it's a pretty high probability that they can sell themselves as a senior engineer outside of the company as well. All right. Okay. We talked about the individuals, which is probably the cornerstone of being an engineering manager. And now I would like to talk about forest, all the trees, all the people in the forest, and how to build a forest, essentially. Hiring is one of my favorite topics, so I'm going to restrain myself from talking too much here. But whenever you try to hire someone, the first thing that you want to do is to build a candidate profile, but there are so many questions popping up all the time, right? It's almost impossible to answer everything immediately. And for this, I started using the framework. Oh, look, there's another usage for this tool. Essentially, what I do is whenever we want to hire someone for a team, I sit down with the engineers and the TM and say, hey, what sort of profile would you like to hire? Who are we looking for? This actually elevates one of the bigger questions during hiring, which is, I'm not sure if this is the person I was looking for, and stuff like this. If everyone sits down in the beginning and agrees on a profile that the team is looking for, this is going to elevate a lot of questions in the future. I want to talk about 2 types of people in this short section: rock stars and superstars. This is also coming from the Radical Candor book, this idea. Basically, the book describes 2 types of software engineers, or 2 types of people that you can be working together with. The first one is the rock star, and the second one is the superstar. Rock stars are people who are great individual contributors. They are very, very good at understanding systems, and they know thoroughly how to work with them. They are reliable, and they deliver everything on time. Now, they're not necessarily the greatest innovators, but that doesn't matter. We really need people who are just great at delivery and can be awesome individual contributors. Now, superstars, on the other hand, they're not necessarily very knowledgeable about the systems. They're not necessarily, great at being stable at delivery, but they are huge ideators. They are like a comet which comes and in a couple of seconds disappears. And that's the thing with superstars. Without them, we wouldn't have amazing new features. Without them, the company wouldn't innovate potentially, technologically or product-wise. But normally they get bored really quickly. So if the company cannot provide them with the growth, they usually leave. And that's what usually happens with superstars on the long run. So part of this is balancing this act. How many people are great individual contributors and how many people are great innovators in the team? Now, let's talk about balancing a little bit more. Let's say that I have a team of 4 and I want to hire another person. There are certain engineering levels. Again, if you don't really have a framework for this, you can just assign numbers from 0 to 100. And you ask yourself these questions: how technical is the team? If we are building HTML code, probably we're not going to need a super technical person for that. But if we are working with, I don't know, complex asynchronous systems written in Scala, then maybe we're going to require a much more technical person for the job. What problems are we going to solve in the future? Looking forward a little bit, if we're going to implement OAuth into our systems, maybe it's worth hiring someone who has expertise in this area. But if the team is in maintenance mode, then sometimes it doesn't really matter if we hire for a special knowledge. And this is probably my favorite question: would the team benefit from mentoring or being mentored? So if we look at this example here, we have levels 2, 4, 2, 1. We see that there are more apprentice developers in this team than senior ones. Now, if the team is a technical team, then probably it's worth hiring another senior person here so they can train them and they can mentor the people who are joining. On the other hand, if we had a team who is full of senior engineers, probably they're looking for someone who they can coach and help to become as good as they are on the short run. It's a balancing act, as I mentioned. Let's go on to designing the hiring pipeline. Many people don't know this, but engineering managers take a huge responsibility in making sure that the hiring pipeline or the process that candidates are going to go through is actually a feasible and a doable pipeline. So I'm going to show you 2 examples here. I'm going to tell you pros and cons about both of these. The first one is what I call a long pipeline. On the other hand, I do want to mention that there are many companies who are doing way, way longer pipelines than this one. So let's start from the beginning. Someone checks the CV. All right, that's easy. We have a screening call. Maybe someone from HR, a recruiter, or a sourcer calls this person and asks them about some basic things, technical, starting from basic technical knowledge to history. Maybe they check if they are a nice person or not as well, and such. Then we do a tech test, right? It could be essential to make sure that a person who claims to know, I don't know, TypeScript actually knows TypeScript, right? These tech tests can be algorithmic. They can just be more focused on, language knowledge and such skills. Usually, these are the tests which are done online by a HackerRank or other similar systems. After a technical test, maybe we could have a manager interview. I saw the test, it was okay, the CV is also great, the screening call is passed, so I want to talk to this person and assess if they would be a good fit for the team. Then we would have a tech interview, maybe with the team. I'm already forgetting what the step 3 before was. Then maybe even put an on-site, and only then the offer. Now, usually the process doesn't end at the offer, but this I consider a long interview process. We start, so the entire process could take weeks if this is the case, depending on how many people are involved, with all the communication, with all the handover documents, with all the scorecards, setting up the interview times. It could be huge difficulty and very long. Now, if you are a big company like Facebook or Google, you run such pipelines or maybe even longer ones because you want to make sure that you minimize for false negatives. And that's completely fair. If the top of your funnel is super wide, then it could be worth it. Now let's talk about the type of processes I like to do, which are the shorter ones. So in this case, we have like a CV, a tech interview, and an offer, right? This can also work. Probably a bunch of you have already interviewed for a lot of companies that have similar setup. The benefit of this is it's super short, right? You send in your application, and within a week, you can get an offer. That's awesome. It's a shorter time for you to make a decision. It's a shorter time for the company to actually put together documents and start the process. it could happen that people who the team doesn't really want to work with cannot get in the system as well. But for this, what I usually make sure is that every person from the team who is interviewing has a chance to talk to the candidate. Usually the way I like to do these interviews, the way I like to design them, is to have pair programming sessions. There's no better way to get to know someone than pair programming and solving a problem together with other strangers that you just got to know. Maybe you checked out their LinkedIn profile. But in essence, talking to the team, it elevates a lot of stress on the candidate, and it elevates a lot of stress on the team as well, regarding if we're making the right choice or not. We ask questions during designing the hiring pipeline, like how many applicants are there? If no one applies to my company because it's just not sexy enough right now, then maybe we need to loosen up the hiring process and choose a shorter one. If a lot of people are applying, then I want to minimize this part, like how many people actually reach the team from the top. How much time does the team have? Even though scaling the team is usually the most important thing that a team could do, it's still super important that if there's a critical project that the company is working on, to be able to save time for people to work in peace. If you don't have much time, then probably we're going to build a tighter pipeline. So the top filters out many people, so less people get to talk to the team. And ultimately, the constraints. I bet many of you work for huge companies, and these companies have processes, right? These companies already give you a pipeline. Okay, this is a hiring process. It's written into a stone brick. You will never be able to change it. Good luck. Even in this case, the engineering manager has some calls to make. For example, who's participating in technical interviews? Who is the first person that is going to interact with the candidate from the team? These are all big questions that need to be answered and that need to be addressed. So building a hiring pipeline is actually pretty difficult, I have to say. And almost last but not least, overseeing the process. The engineering manager has to be there during the entire time. They have to interact with the people team. They have to interact with the recruiters and the sourcers to find the right candidates. They have to give good profiles to people when they screen them. Then he doesn't get bothered. The engineering manager needs to be there from the very start of the process. I personally review CVs myself. I think in the past 2 years, I've looked at around 2,000 CVs. My eyes were bleeding by the end of it, but it was super worth it because you can learn who is going to be good depending on their CV as well. And we have to be there in the entire process. And part of it is getting the team together, right? After the interviews are done, after we went through the entire pipeline, the team needs to get together and they need to make a call. And some people will not like the candidate. And then probably the good call is not to hire that person, actually. And, at this point comes a pretty difficult part for the engineering manager, giving feedback, right? I will show you an example that I usually do. So I write every rejection letter personally. So, and giving feedback to people who you just met for a couple of hours is a very, very difficult task, but there is a system to it. First, I make sure to give them the feedback, tell them what was great during the interview, and tell them what didn't go so well. In this case, this candidate, their JavaScript fundamentals were not too good. They had issues with the built-ins, and ultimately they didn't pass the interview through me. I write them that how can they improve, right? Just if you tell them that, oh, you suck, this didn't go well, giving them feedback on how they can improve is also really good. So for example, here I'm telling them that, maybe trying out HackerRank before the interview can actually help them a lot. By the way, 15 minutes of HackerRank before a technical interview does wonders. Okay, so my pro tip to all of you is just do 15 minutes warm up, jump into the interview, and you're gonna rock it, I guarantee. And of course, very important that you don't burn bridges. Just because a person didn't do so well on this interview, it doesn't mean that in the future they're going to fail as well. Maybe they were super interesting. There's a reason why they got to this part. So, make sure not to burn bridges, be nice to people, and let them go gently. All right, now we have a winning candidate. We're done, right? Well, no, that's the bad news. It's time for us to craft an offer. And this is a particularly tricky thing because the engineering manager needs to be the mediator between the candidate and the company, right? We want to work with this person. The team really, really wants to work with this person. But let's say the company doesn't have the money to do it. Now, what to do in that case, right? So the engineering manager needs to start getting creative. Like sweet talking sometimes works, but some people don't really work like this. So in this case, moving, for example, options or shares that the company have and offering them to the candidate could be one solution. But yeah, this is a really tricky part. And even after you have given an offer, the person who applied to you could still reject, right? There is no rest for the wicked. Okay, we're done with hiring, right? Well, no, because there is one important part that we need to talk about, which is onboarding. Just because we hired the person, we cannot just put them in the cubicle and be like, okay, have fun. Jira is here. Doesn't really work like that. So we need to give them some sort of training, right? We need to make sure that they feel included and they feel like part of the team. We need to make sure that they are happy to work here and they have all the tools to succeed. At Prezi, we don't super overdo this, and every team does it their own way. In my experience, there are two key factors that actually help a successful onboarding. First one is a checklist. Yes, it's that simple. Have a list where you write down what the candidate needs to know by the end of their probation period, right? And then you can make sure that you give them the appropriate training, and they can make sure that they get the appropriate training that's required to do their job. Sometimes it's this simple. One more thing that is super, super important is giving feedback, right? I mentioned feedback already in this talk, and again, super duper important. Make sure that every other or every couple of weeks, the person who joined your team gets the appropriate feedback they need to grow, that they get all of the information to be successful. If you don't do this, the onboarding is going to crash and everybody will be sad. Including the candidate who just recently joined your team, including the team who hired this person, and including the company who's in a real jiffy right now. All right, to keep being mindful of time, I want to shift the focus a little bit. We talked about the individual, we talked about the team, and now a very popular a very popular question I get a lot is, how technical does an engineering manager needs to be? Let me give you the short answer. Engineering manager doesn't need to be technical. And if I want to expand on the question a little bit, engineering manager should be very technical. Now, I cannot spend all my time coding anymore. It's just absolutely impossible with all the things I need to take care of, all the things that I mentioned before, right? There is no way that it's possible. But I still try to contribute. I make sure that I put the ship it emojis in Slack for people to be able to deploy their things. I read a lot of code, actually. When I have a 15-minute break, I just sit down, I just read a couple of open pull requests, leave some comments, keep up to date with the code. Another thing I like to do is these beautiful one-line fixes. For example, this one, pin the X-ray SDK. It's one-line addition and zero removal. Absolutely perfect. This is the kind of commits that I can do very efficiently. And yeah, so essentially contributing a little bit to the team builds trust between the engineering manager and the team. So if you're in the EM and you feel like you have a free 15 minutes during your day, just look at the code, make a commit. Feels good, man. It feels awesome. Here's my contribution graph from this year. As you can see clearly, I inherited the second team around May. From there on, the dark green started becoming very light green. I'm still trying to keep up. I'm still trying to make sure that my code is also included and the people appreciate it. And as I said, the one-on-ones are for the employee and not the employer. So if someone comes to me with a technical problem, I want to be able to answer it and I want to be able to help them, right? And another area which I actually try to be better in is just being good at big picture. In my free time, I love to read books that are a little forward-thinking in technologies. And with this, I can help senior engineers to become better. Now that we talked about the technical stuff, there is one more really important area that I would like to address, and that is growing the business. So let's take a look at the bee's knees. How does an engineering manager participate in the business of a company? Firstly, they marry the business needs to the team's needs. We have something like this in our systems, and I'm looking at you. Our systems are ugly. When we touch them, it hurts. When we try to grow them, when we try to pour water on them, they just die. This is usually how technical systems are working. And this is what product wants, right? They want something beautiful, something elegant, something that the users feel like it's magic to use. But getting from a cactus to a lotus flower is really difficult. But there are ways to do it, right? And this is partly the engineering manager's jobs, making sure that the sometimes insane product requirements that we get translate well to the crappy systems that we are maintaining today, and trying to find a compromise around all of this and how we can move on the long term to this that we are wishing for. Another thing that I look at, that I do a lot, is I look at data. I look at a lot of data. This is an indicative chart. Indicative is a log management system that we are using to graph out our numbers about the feature. We were deciding if we want to drop it or not. For me, it's easy to look it up. I save some time with the engineers, and we can have an educated discussion about this afterwards. Quite important. I'm also not afraid of the terminal. Neither should you or your boss be, in reality. Sometimes I just enter our systems and quickly run a grep, right, to get some information about API calls and stuff like this. If someone needs help in debugging, I make sure this is done. And last but not least in this area is translating the direction to the team. I bet a lot of you have CEOs who just look to the stars. They say, in 2 years, we want to have 18 billion users registered. Or in 5 years, we want to be on the revenue of Amazon. Probably if you're working for Amazon right now, this doesn't really apply to you. These are insane requirements. Like, even I, as an engineering manager, have difficulty imagining how we can get here. Especially an engineer who's just working on teeny tiny functions, on some features. How can you comprehend this? And this is our job, again, to translate this into something that we can understand, to translate this into a more local direction that's going to lead us to the stars and actually have a perspective that we can understand. As we are getting to the end of the talk, I want to have a quick recap. And you know, what happens over time is our garden gets messy, right? So if we don't tend for things, the shrubbery is going to grow, the ants are going to invade, bugs are coming in, as we all know. And you know, what an engineering manager really does is the following. We have the good soil. We plant the tree that grows. Then we plant the forest. We have the team grow. Making sure that individuals and the team are pulling themselves upwards and not leaving each other down. We make sure that we interact well with other teams. And if someone is stronger than we are, we should leverage their knowledge. There is no us versus them, there's only us. We are working together in this forest to be stronger. Engineering managers help engineers to build with efficiency and fun, helping them think about how to organize their tools so going to work is not tedious. And of course, we have to align and motivate so the business can thrive and we can give products to users that are great to use. This is my talk. Manage what the hell my boss does anyway. My name is Ákos Hochrein. You can find me on social media here. I have a GitHub. I have a Twitter. I have a blog. You can check those out. If you want to reach me on email, it's akos.hochrein@prezi.com. I also wrote a book, Designing Microservices with Django. If you're into these things, this is a pretty lightweight introduction book to some techniques on how to move from a monolithic application to a microservice. Throughout the talk, I mentioned a couple of books. I created a Goodreads collection over here, if you want to check it out. And you know, as an EM, I want to make sure that credit is given where credit is due. So I want to thank my teams who give me endless supply of knowledge so I can grow and I can actually give talks like this with confidence. I want to thank my previous bosses and my previous mentors, Zsolt, Attila, Csaba, Fernando, Tyler, Marcio, Jose, Andy. Thank you to all of you. I learned a lot from you. You're great people. And I also want to thank my wife, who's sitting right here. She made sure that I was actually working on the presentation instead of playing video games. And I also want to thank the conference organizers for letting me give this talk. It's a great pleasure. And thank you to you, the viewer, for being here. And thank you for listening to me babbling about the things that I love to do for 47 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ákos, for this very engaging presentation. It was really interesting to learn more about your work. And let's see what the audience wants to know. We're most likely a bit delayed with the stream on YouTube. So I will take the chance and ask a question myself. So I'm very curious about if you think if there's a critical size in the team that an engineering manager can handle and also deliver so that the product is actually getting done.
It's I love this question actually. It's really usually the answer is that it depends on the team itself. In my experience, teams of 4 or 5 people are the most efficient. Anything bigger than that is usually a conversation already that people just don't know what others are working on. They get confused, or when they need to touch each other's ownerships, then there are difficulties. So I would say that when I'm building teams, I'm keeping them to 4 or 5 people.
Thank you. Okay, now. Okay, still waiting for your questions. Oh, we got one question quite early in the presentation, and that was asking about how you actually created the presentation. Was it with Prezi?
Yes. So actually, I created this presentation in Prezi Present, and then I imported it into Prezi Video, and that's how this presentation was built. So if you're not familiar with with the products, then Prezi Present is our presentation tool. But what you can do is you can just build a presentation that's really fancy and then pull it into Prezi Video and use the video canvas to use like streaming tools like this one to engage with you.
Thank you. Here we have another question that is, if you have any advice for managers of more research-oriented teams.
It's really interesting. So I never worked with research teams, so take all of my answers in regards to this as a grain of salt. Oh, one sec, my battery is going off now. Oh, okay. Excuse me, I'm still here. So thank you so much for the question. What I think is that the base principles are the same. Okay, the radical candor framework works everywhere, for sure. I would say that if you are working in a more research-oriented team, probably as a leader, you need to be more involved in the technology. In general, what I see is that when I'm working closer to a team which works with heavy technology, so let's say that they are building those complex systems in Scala that I was mentioning before, in general, it's better as an engineering manager to be more involved with the technology and get closer to the iron. And probably this is true for research-oriented teams as well, so you understand the work that they are doing more.
Thank you. We have a question from Helio. When do you think is a good moment to take the leap from developers to managers?
Never. No, I'm just kidding. It's again a great question. So I think not everyone is born to be a manager. Born to be is like a tough word I hear and know, but I just know that some people's careers push them into this direction, but some people just don't want to work this closely with other people. But if you want to become an engineering manager, what I recommend is doing a trial for it first. Maybe become a technical lead or some mixed role where you have to deal with people and tech at the same time. I have a very close friend actually who took up an engineering manager role at the company back in Budapest, and we just talked like 2 or 3 days ago. And he said that, yeah, after 3 months, he just said that he wants to go back to being an engineer because he just felt better there. So I would say that, you know, if you feel like your life is pushing you this way, or your company is pushing you this way, try it out, but don't be scared of stepping back.
Yeah, that's really nice to know that there's an option. But I guess it's also what you meant with you need to continue being technical so that you can actually have several options, right?
Yeah.
I actually had this question. Can one step back from an engineering manager to a developer position? But that one we covered now. Or do you want to elaborate more on that?
Sure. Like, you know, you're in control of your career, ultimately. If you feel uncomfortable in a situation, you know, everyone has a boss, okay? Even the CEOs have bosses. Even those people have bosses. If you feel uncomfortable in the position that you are, if I felt uncomfortable as an engineering manager, I would certainly talk to my boss about it. Maybe the situation is not as bad as you feel. Maybe the situation is just some glitch in the system. Maybe you just need some more love from your engineering manager or your peers to be able to do your job more efficiently. So I recommend talking to your boss first and figuring out what's wrong. And if you cannot fix that wrong, then it's completely okay to ask for a step back.
Thanks. Now I have another question. When you're a developer, you can feel rewarded when you delivered good code, for example. What do you as a manager find rewarding to keep your own fun going? Really good question.
Yeah, this is an awesome question. You know, so basically what gets me out of the bed? Personally, what I get, so, you know, it also depends on the person, right? I know managers who are very executionary. They like to live in processes. They love to deliver products. They like to deliver things. They want to make sure that Jira is absolutely pinpoint perfect. The automation is in place. There are some managers who are more technical. They are very engaged when the team picks up on one of their ideas or one of the directions that got mentioned. I'm a people person. I love to work with people. So whenever I have a one-on-one where we have a constructive conversation about how we can improve our work at the company, I always feel elevated. So, you certainly need to learn how to not get addicted to commits, or you need to learn how the dopamine hit from the commits is not that strong anymore, but you can get used to it and find happiness in these areas, for example.
Thank you. And another one. How do you get the positive feedback?
Actually,
do you get a positive feedback as a manager?
Yeah, actually, so positive feedback is actually the easier thing to get as a manager. The constructive feedback is a difficult thing to get, and that's where you have to have really good questions to ask to the people who you are working with. Positive feedback. I send out my feedback form on small improvements, for example, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, I love working with you." Like, imagine telling your boss, "Yeah, you suck." Right? You would not say this to your boss, right? You would maybe sugarcoat it until it becomes a gigantic cake and the message is lost in the middle, or you just don't give any constructive feedback for the person to grow. And this is actually one of the challenges that I think all engineering managers have. Like, we have this barrier of authority between the people who we work with and us. And that makes it difficult to get the feedback that we need to grow. So actually, to this question, it's actually harder to get constructive feedback than to get positive feedback from our work.
Thank you. Do you have a method or technique how you challenge your employees to get this constructive feedback?
Oh yeah, but I don't want to tell you because then they're going to notice.
Okay, let's not reveal your secret.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then thank you again, Ákos, for your amazing presentation. I think we learned a lot from it, and we look forward to chatting with you on Slack and testing out Prezi. And for everyone who is continuing to attend PyCon, we will branch out into different tracks and see you again for the closing remarks at 5:30. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.